To je v vodě, poslední. Tak dobré odpoledne, vážené dámy, vážení pánové. Díky za to, že jste v toto adventní páteční odpoledne dorazili do Evropského domu. Chtěl bych vás srdečně přivítat právě na naší půdě. Moje jméno je Zdeněk Čech a jsem zástupce vedoucí zastoupení Evropské komise v České republice a chtěl bych vás pouze uvítat na této debatě k dlouhodobé strategii Evropské unie pro snižování emisí. A to navazuje na krok Evropské komise, která 28. listopadu, čili nedávno navrhla návrh dlouhodobou strategii pro klimaticky neutrální Evropskou unii v roce 2050 a já si myslím, že to je naprosto aktuální zásadní téma nejenom pro celou EU, ale i pro Českou republiku. Česká republika má velice silný průmyslový sektor a sice nedopadá to sice nejenom na průmyslový sektor, ale předpokládám, že tuto debatu pořádáme zde ve spolupráci se Svazem průmyslu dopravy České republiky a CEBRE, Českou podnikatelskou reprezentací při EU, tak si myslím, že hodně se o tomto sektoru bude debatovat a opravdu se na tuto debatu těším, protože myslím si, že v české kotlině se o tomto tématu tak úplně ve srovnání s jinými členskými zeměmi možná tak úplně jako nedebatuje. Sice jsem zaregistroval tento týden zde v Evropském domě již 2 debaty na podobné téma, ale stále si myslím, že ten informační deficit je třeba zaplňovat ve veřejném prostoru a myslím si, že se posuneme dál a doufám, že ta dnešní debata k tomu přispěje, že jestli vůbec cítíme naléhavou potřebu řešit například klimatické změny, anebo jestli teď, když se obrátím na ten průmysl, jestli je oblast klimatu právě pro průmysl vítanou změnou nebo změnou, která by mohla přinést nějaké inovační příležitosti pro další růst, tam, kde by prostě evropský průmysl mohl být určitým světovým lídrem. Čili moc vás vítám ještě jednou, díky za to ještě jednou, že jste přišli a předávám slovo milému panu moderátorovi Davidovi Klimešovi. Prosím.
Dobrý den, dovolte, abych i já vás přivítal na debatě s názvem Dlouhodobá strategie Evropské unie pro snižování emisí. Z těch pořádajících partnerů ještě bych rád doplnil a poděkoval zastoupení Evropské komise v České republice a kanceláře Evropského parlamentu v České republice, že pořádá a spolupořádá tuto konferenci a jsem rád, že spolupořádá zrovna nyní, protože jistě víte, že se časově překrýváme s konferencí v Katovicích. Já jenom zmíním 2 základní čísla z té konference, která nyní probíhá, a to je, že jedno neradostné, jedno mírně radostné, to méně radostné je, že podle bilance zveřejněné na konferenci emise CO2 spojené s průmyslem a spalováním uhlí, ropných výrobků a zemního plynu by letos měly vzrůst o 2,7% oproti loňskému roku. To mírně radostnější je, že co se týče evropských emisí, tak tam je pokles o 0,7%. Pokud to přepočteme od roku 1990 do roku 2016, tak je to pokles o 4,4%. O tom, co to znamená, se budeme bavit dál. A to mi vysvětlí naši vzácní hosté, co to vlastně znamená. Na úvod bych rád uvítal pana Toma van Ierlanda, vedoucího oddělení pro strategii a ekonomické hodnocení generálního ředitelství pro oblast klimatu Evropské komise. Pana Miroslava Havránka, ředitele společnosti Cenia, Česká informační agentura životního prostředí. A dále bude hovořit především za biznis Pavel Řežábek, hlavní ekonom společnosti ČES. A pak ještě chci uvítat jednoho hosta, který se k nám připojí videozdravictví nebo videoposelstvím, jak to nazvat, a to je pan europoslanec Evžen Tošenovský. Co bude čekat vás v těch 2 hodinkách? Určitě si prosím připravujte dotazy, určitě si prosím vyzvedněte, kdo ještě nemá taková ta hlasovací zařízení, protože po úvodních slovech přijde na řadu takové pár otázek, kdybych se vás vlastně zeptal tady to auditorium, co si myslí o některých oblastech, takže kdo ještě nemá, tak si může ty hlasovací zařízení vyzvednout a pak samozřejmě bude určitě celá plejáda dotazů. Takže já na úvod, zcela logicky, bych poprosil zástupce Evropské komise, generálního ředitelství pro oblast klimatu, aby vlastně nám přiblížil, o co se nyní jedná a jak vypadají ty základní parametry té dlouhodobě udržitelné klimaticky neutrální Evropské unie. Prosím.
Thank you very much. I apologize. I don't speak Czech, but I'm sure the translation will do its perfect work. Indeed, my name is Tom van Ieland. I work for the European Commission and I work on the topic of climate change. Last week, the Commission adopted its vision for clean Europe, its vision for a climate neutral Europe. Today I will present that, and I think I'm also very happy to be today here because it's the first time I go already to one of the member states to discuss this. For us, this is a proposal that we want to discuss in depth with all stakeholders, and we are very much looking forward to have that debate in the coming months. And for me, this is the first occasion outside of Brussels to present that. Maybe to sketch a little bit the context of the work. The context is one where we have the Paris Agreement, and in the Paris Agreement there is the explicit request to look at the long term and to plan for the long term, to develop long-term strategies. Our proposal is the first input to that, to make sure that the EU can meet the deadline of 2020 to submit by 2020 a long-term strategy to the UNFCCC under the Paris Agreement. Now I have to say that I'm in a special country in that context. The Czech Republic, together with 3 other member states, are 4 of our member states that already have submitted such a long-term strategy to the UNFCCC. So clearly people have been doing their homework already on this topic in the Czech Republic, and we welcome that very much. But coming to our own proposal. We also had requests from the European Parliament and the European Council to prepare that debate, explicitly asking the Commission to look into this. There is a requirement under a new set of regulation, the governance regulation of the Energy Union, to do so also, including looking at scenarios going to net zero greenhouse gas emissions. The document we brought out last week is a reply to these 2 requests from Parliament and Council and the requirement under the governance regulation. To go into the content of the document has 5, let's say, sections, and I'll quickly describe all 5 sections. The first section tries to frame why we tackle climate change and why we want to do this long-term strategy. It's exactly because, well, climate change is happening. We are already at 1 degree temperature change on a global scale, and actually in the EU we are at a higher level. We are at average 1.5 temperature increase in the EU. We start to see severe implications from that. We had 18 of the warmest years in the last 20 years. We had, out of the last 5 years, 4 years with extreme heat waves in Europe, and this year was a particularly bad one in general. This is starting to impact our real economy. I think one example is the fact that transportation in certain parts of the Rhine got blocked over summer. This has significant impacts on our ecosystems, and I think very important in that context is that the IPCC special report highlighted how much more the impacts will become, but also made clear that there's still quite some difference between a world that achieves only 1.5 temperature increase or a world that goes to 2 degrees temperature increase. Significant differences of impacts. An example is ecosystems. When temperatures stay at 1.5, the impacts are around, I think, 4%. of change of ecosystems on a global scale. If you go to 2, we are already above 10% of shifts, so these are dramatic shifts. And I think the primary example there is that with 1.5 degrees we would still have coral reefs in the world, and with 2 degrees we will probably lose coral reefs. Some bleak messages in that context. That gets us to the second part of the communication. The second part of the communication is the vision the Commission wants to bring forward. That vision is clearly framed in the context of the Paris Agreement, which asks us to work towards to achieve well below 2 degree temperature objective, and to pursue efforts to stay within 1.5 degrees. Looking at the special report of the IPCC, we think it's worthwhile to try to pursue 1.5, because that clearly limits the impacts significantly still. Translating that for the EU means that we will have to take leadership. While the world will have to become net zero GHG around or by 2070, we will have to be earlier. We think we need to be making ourselves ready to be a net zero GHG economy by 2050. But it's not only about emissions. I think the vision is also strongly framed in the idea of modernization of our economy and making the quality of living of our citizens a better one. It's a vision that strives to look at different angles of this debate. Finally, it's a vision, it's a proposal, because will now have to be discussed between member states, parliaments, stakeholders at large. It's not a legal proposal. This is not a proposal to change, for instance, the 2030 targets and the legal framework we are just finalizing under the co-decision procedures in Brussels. That gets me to the third part of the communication. The third part of the communication is what we call the building blocks. The building blocks try to look at what are the kind of actions, kind of technologies we need to see coming forward in our economy and our society to be able to make that transformation. And we've listed 7 of them. The first one is energy efficiency. We see clearly the need to continue to invest in energy efficiency. We see that in our most ambitious setup, we could reduce energy final demand by up to 50% compared to 2005 by 2050. One sector comes clearly to the fore there, and that's the building sector. That will be the sector with the biggest challenges. How can we increase renovation rates? How can we increase living conditions, but also how can we make our people ready to do so? And that lists questions around financing, questions also around skills to make sure we have the workforce to make those renovations. The second topic is electrification. We see a significant increase of electrification in our economy. We see a strong drive of renewables doing so. Most of the scenarios at the EU level have 80% of renewables penetration in the electricity sector. But at the same time, we also see still nuclear in the energy mix in those member states that select so. Electrification is a very interesting energy carrier if you want to look at a low carbon or net zero GHG economy. It itself is a carrier that can replace other fossil fuel carriers, but it also is a carrier that can make new fuels. Think about hydrogen, think about power to X, so the creation of e-fuels. The third building block relates to transport, where we see indeed the transport sector evolve to a more digitized, connected transport system. We don't think there's a single technology that solves all transport, and certain transport modes will go for different types of solutions. But clearly, for instance, in cars, electrification is a pathway that can lead to significant reductions. You have the other side of the spectrum, and that's of course aviation, where we will still need liquid energy carriers, and those will have to be replaced over time by advanced biofuels and by e-fuels if you want to become carbon and climate neutral. The fourth building block is industry. It was highlighted already in the introduction. We see the transformation as one that can lead to a modernized competitive industry. We see actually in our assessment that a lot is happening there at the industrial level. We've had many inputs from the industries signaling how they could potentially reduce emissions. It's a combination of, one could say, energy technology itself, where many more options are coming to the table than only a few years ago. So it's electrification, it is also the use of hydrogen, it's the use of biomass, and potentially the use of, again, e-fuels in the sector. But it's also an issue about new business models and new business concepts. Key in there is the idea to go towards a much more resource-efficient economy and to go to a circular economy. It's an economy with more recycling, more reuse, new business models, but still with an industry highly active in producing the goods that our consumers need for the way we live. Nevertheless, we do see that in the end there are some emissions in industry that we probably cannot reduce to zero by these types of technologies or business concept changes. So we still see a role for carbon capture and storage in those sectors where needed still to reduce emissions. The fifth building block is one about infrastructure. We see the need to think about how our infrastructure will change in the coming decades to go towards such an economy. That is both at the, let's say, very high level and also at the local level. The high level, the EU level, is of course the infrastructure across borders. We will need to continue to develop that. The penetration of more renewables into the EU energy system will benefit from such interconnections. But it probably is not limited only to renewables. We need to think about other types of networks too. Think about hydrogen, think even about CO2, think about how we can interconnect our industries, both within clusters of industries and between clusters of industries. But it's also infrastructure at the local level, and that's of course strongly linked to a more decentralized power system. And it is about how we build the infrastructure to decarbonize our transport system. So think about charging stations, think about hydrogen fuel stations that will need to be developed. The sixth building block is the building block that thinks and looks at the bioeconomy. For us, the bioeconomy is an important part of the solution. Part of the bioeconomy is, of course, the production of food, feed, and fiber by our agriculture sector. That, of course, will need to continue. It is a sector itself that produces emissions, notably what we refer to as the non-CO2 emissions. We think they can still be reduced. There are options, technologies, and management changes out there. But it will also be a sector where there will still always be emissions. We cannot get non-CO2 to zero. Luckily, it's a sector that has a lot of other elements in a low-carbon economy. It's a sector that can absorb emissions in its soil. That is one function it has. It's a sector that can supply biomass to, together with forests for a bioeconomy. Biomass in itself is an important element. It has many, many features in a low-carbon economy. From an energy perspective, well, it can be burned and produce heat. It can be transformed in other fuels, think about advanced biomass. It can be used to substitute material and in that way be part of the economy and reduce emissions in itself. And it can be employed together with carbon capture and storage, and then it can create even absorptions of emissions that can compensate any remaining emissions. So a clear role for biomass in the bioeconomy, in the low carbon transformation. That raises, of course, the issue on how to sustainably produce the biomass. We do think that the required amounts of increases in biomass cannot come just from the existing forests. So we need to think about how to develop further biomass supply. We see agriculture as having an important role. We can also see developments at the EU-wide scale of more afforestation that in time itself become new sources of forest products. Which gets me to the last point, that is how to enhance our natural sink. Right now in Europe, our forests, our soils absorb net 300 million tons CO2 a year. That's not nothing, that's 7% of our emissions. How can we further improve that? There are a number of elements we can do. As I said, we can change management practices for soil management, we can enhance forest management, we can do afforestation, and we can restore certain degraded types of land. Think about, for instance, wetland or peatland restoration. Gets me to the last building block, and the last building block is that we will have to tackle any remaining emissions by carbon capture and storage. Now we see less need for the development of carbon capture and storage than we did a number of years ago. It has to do with the fact that in industry we see many more options to reduce, so it's a sector where we see less of that deployment probably. It's also because we see renewables penetrate much faster than we thought before. Nevertheless, some emissions will remain. Nevertheless, CCS can also have a role in producing hydrogen if combined with natural gas reformation, and if combined with biomass it can create a negative emission. So we think it's still a technology that will need to be developed. It's a technology that has its challenges. We have not been able in Europe to demonstrate it at scale. There is an issue with public acceptance in certain member states, and there are sometimes regulatory barriers. So we think we will need to continue to invest in this, to invest in demonstration, to see how we can develop that technology. I think I'm already over my 10 minutes, and I have another 5. Gets us to the framework. I just described all the actions, but we are very aware that the actions in itself will come not as such. We will need a framework to be able to do that. That gets us to framework conditions. There are a number of framework policies that are highly important. To give a few examples, research and innovation, finance policies, but also social policies, just transition policies. We see transformation as an investment agenda, and I think that's a positive thing. We will need more investments in our energy system, transport system, and building system compared to a business as usual setup. We think that will spur growth. We have projections up to 2% economic growth because of that. But of course, it raises the question on how to raise the finance. That links to policy initiatives that are already ongoing, such as the greening of finance, but also the use of, let's say, policy measures, budgets, to enhance that. And I think our own proposal for next budget for the EU is full of these kinds of examples on how we want to try to enhance investment potential in these sectors. That gets me to economic and social impacts. As said, we think overall the economic impact is a positive one. Nevertheless, we do recognize that certain sectors will or decline. That can lead into, for instance, certain types of extraction, notably fossil fuel extraction. And certain sectors will need to go through transformation. They will still be there, but they will be producing their goods in a different way. That links certainly to the energy-intensive industries, and that also links to sectors where the products that they sell right now emit emissions. And I think a good example of that is the automobile manufacturing sector. Therefore, we see a strong need for skill formation. We will need to invest in having the skills ready for these new, or let's say rather transformed industries. We also need to be open that some regions will be more affected than others. We have in the communication a nice graph with areas where there is more of these sectors located, and I think the Czech Republic is one of these countries where that's the case. Therefore, a need to be proactive in that in policy making. From our side, we recognize that EU policies have a role to play. Think about cohesion funding, think about social and employment funding that can impact that. The EU's role on a global scale will change. Sometimes a more sensitive topic right now, but we think open markets help. We think open trade is a good thing for a low carbon transformation. It will help spread technologies faster, and it will reduce costs at a global scale to achieve that. Nevertheless, we see good opportunities for trade in green products. We also need to make sure that we have access to the material needed to produce these goods. So that's the discussion on raw or scarce materials. So a role for trade policy in that context to make sure the EU has access to these raw materials. Our geopolitical situation or position will change, and we will need to proactively engage on that. Finally, as the biggest market in the world, our standards, the way we set standards impacts not only our own markets, but has a positive impact on global manufacturing and how they produce efficient goods. Which gets me to the final point. We have a number of action points. I'm not going to list them, that we say here we should focus on, because they capture basically all the elements I've been producing already. Then finally it's next steps, and part of the next steps is the reason why I'm here. Next steps is that this is a proposal. This will need discussion, and we think this will need societal-wide discussion. We are willing to come to not only the venues in Brussels, but also to member states to discuss this, and to have that engagement with all stakeholders. Then, in the end, this will of course go to the EU institutions, with a view on adopting this by, we hope, at least early 2020, to be in time with the deadline for the UNFCCC. Thank you.
Děkuji velice za představení toho dokumentu. Já myslím, že bylo na místě mít trošku delší úvodní slovo, protože to je opravdu záměr, který jde neuvěřitelně daleko, a děkuji, že jste představil veškeré fazety, které celý ten plán má. Myslím, že v této chvíli by bylo vhodné slyšet taky hlas z Evropského parlamentu, a ten nám prostřednictvím videa přinese pan europoslanec Tošenovský, tak já poprosím.
Tak jednak rok 2050 se dobře plánuje. Je to ještě hrozně daleko, kdyby to bylo za 5 let, tak je to složitější. To, jestli je reálný, to by se nikdo není schopen říct. Bezemisní Evropa je velmi ambiciozní cíl, a já mám obavu, že pro mě je to cíl, který je krásně znějící pro rok 2050 v roce 2018. Pro mě je ale důležitější, co se bude dávat do vědy výzkumu, jak půjde technologický tok, jaké budou inovace, tak aby se chránilo životní prostředí. Jenom samotný tento výkřik je pro mě nebezpečný, protože může způsobit chování takové, které bude drsnější vůči životnímu prostředí. Že lidé se začnou chovat, nebudou si kupovat nová auta, nebude se investovat do inovací, protože budou dojíždět ty staré. Takže pro mě je to cíl takový krásně znějící headline pro noviny, ale vnitřně nebezpečný. Tak v prvé řadě na začátku je ten výzkum a věda výzkum, která to má táhnout. Pak podpořit investice jako takové znamená, že nejprve ty investice by měly být v oblastech, kde ten veřejný sektor zapadá, a ne z hlediska dotačních věcí. Ať se dotuje věda výzkum, tam je to jednoznačné, tam bych klidně zvyšoval tyto objemy, ale samotné investice musí být motivační z hlediska toho, že to je ekonomicky výhodné, a ne jenom výhodné z pohledu regulací ekonomických parametrů.